Thanks for coming back for part 2 of this tree care video. We ended part 1 discussing controls for smaller vegetation. Just some quick notes on controlling larger vegetation. Bigger brush or trees may require a chainsaw and maybe some herbicide with the active ingredient tricloper such as Garlon if you don't want the shrubs and trees coming back. If you have invasive tree or plant species in your planting location, your plan may include eradication efforts. Garlic mustard, buckthorn, and black locust are 3 that I deal with the most. I also have a major vine issue on one property. Vines are tough to kill because they re-root every time they hit the ground. Right now it's a lot of annual tugging and pulling with a squirt of Garlon if I find its home base. Garlic mustard can be sprayed with Glide or small pockets can be pulled out by hand. I also try to kill off cottonwoods, box elder, and other soft maple trees as they show up. A quick squirt of Garlon or the like on young trees kills them pretty easily. More chemical will be needed on larger trees. Girdling or hinge cutting larger trees are also often used techniques at controlling unwanted trees. I have also started to selectively reduce populations of hickory and black walnut trees in areas to give other tree varieties a better chance at survival. These tree species produce the chemical juglone, which can have a negative effect on some tree species. Here I sprayed Garlon 4 on 2 hickory trees to free up some room for a crabapple tree that is a deer magnet for early bow season. And I removed a half dozen 30-foot black walnut trees from this pocket as I couldn't get pine or spruce seedlings to grow around them in this spot where I'm looking to grow a visual screen. I've started to fill in with cedar now as they do not seem to be affected by the juglone. Now on to the next big pest you will likely have to deal with. Deer mouths and buck antlers are brutally hard on many varieties of trees, but again, doing your homework prior to planting can offset problems. Having an equal love for both deer and trees creates an emotional roller coaster ride. You love seeing deer amongst your trees and you hate seeing deer amongst your trees. If you are a deer fanatic, you already know that deer tend to rip up on certain varieties of trees more than others. Same can be said about trees that they browse on. I planted a few hundred white pine trees knowing that white pine is like candy to deer, but I really like white pine trees so I planted them anyway, knowing that they would likely require human intervention to keep them alive. I decided to simply monitor them closely and take action when required. This was not a great plan. The deer left them alone in the first year, but the second winter they browsed right down the rows doing some major damage in a week's time. If you are going to plant a tree species that deer like to browse on, especially in an area where deer winter, you need to develop a plan to somehow protect those trees. My deer countermeasures on the new property have been tree tubes and wire tree shelters. First, let's discuss tree tubes. There are many kinds and they all have pros and cons. I have only used Plantra tree tubes, so I can't give too much comparative information between brands from experience. Again, there's a lot of information on the internet to help you decide which ones you want to use. I started out using 4-foot tubes and quickly moved to 5-foot tubes the following year. Deer will feast on the trees as they pop out of the top of either size tube, but it does seem there is definitely less damage as you increase the height of the tube. Hanging soap on the top of the tubes did help for a few weeks, but deer quickly get accustomed to the new normal. In my opinion, increasing the height of the tube also factors into the stability of the tree's trunk. Trees definitely get a jump start in a tube, but it comes at a price as it takes several years for some varieties of trees to then develop its trunk into a self-supporting base. If it were not for deer, I wouldn't use tubes on many tree varieties. The maintenance required to assist the tree until its trunk is self-supporting is problematic in and of itself. I use primarily steel T-posts to support my tubes. Many tube makers recommend an oak or bamboo stake inside the tube. I stake my T-posts on the outside. Again, pros and cons to both, I'm sure, but I will detail my experiences with steel posts. I was able to get most of my T-posts for very little or no cost. I couldn't say that about oak or bamboo stakes. It can get very expensive if you have to buy any stakes at full cost. If the T-post is too short, you may have problems with a weak tree trunk kinking the tube over, and if it's too long, the tree will get scars from blowing into the T-post on windy days. The top of a Plantra tube itself can cause scarring on a tree. I have tried several ways to counter this with duct tape and string and other tools, but simply put, wind and weak tree trunks do not make a good recipe. Now the mice story. Mice love tree tubes. Placing a T-post on the outside of the tube gives mice an easier avenue into the inside. Even without that avenue though, mice will work hard to get inside. A nest of mice at the bottom of a tube over winter does not bode well for your young tree. After coming out of my first winter with tubes and tree losses due to mice, I lost my mind and vowed revenge. This is not a battle you are going to win with mouse traps, but it did make me feel better for a short time. But I saw no relief from mouse damage coming out of my second winter season. For the most part, it was one variety of mouse adding risk to the trees, and I was out there killing many kinds of rodents. It was an interesting trap line to run for a few weeks that I did it. The next winter I took a few walks looking for signs of developing nests, but I lost a few more trees to mice again. Desperate for a solution, I made a decision to lift probably 90% of my tubes that next year. I lifted them probably 2 to 5 inches in hopes of not being hospitable to mice and not too high as to allow rabbits to do winter girdling of the bark. The following spring I had only one mouse nest in a raised tube, and it was halfway up the tube and a bunch of leaves that got caught in branches. I have actually started testing raised tubes in new seedling transplants. I'm hoping this technique will allow for some slower growing trees, which should mean more sturdy trunks and the tree becoming self-supporting faster. Raising the tubes also means no more finding dead birds at the base of the tubes. Bird nets on the top of tubes can cause deformed trees if you do not pull the nets off in time. And with raised tubes, they are not even needed. For me, raised tubes has been a huge success. But each tree farmer has different habitat to work with and could encounter different risks. I have begun to pull T-posts now as some trees are ready to go it alone. So far the process has been relatively easy, but I am sure I will come across some that have tree roots wrapped around the post. The T-post has to come out, whereas oak or bamboo stakes could be left in to rot. Tree tubes are not the all-in-all answer, as they are only for deciduous trees, and raccoons and other critters are like kids at Christmas and just have to see what's hidden inside. And well, marauding bucks just can't control themselves. Finally, I want to discuss wire tree shelters. To protect conifers and shrubs, I began making wire shelters to place around trees. I have also now placed some around hardwood seedlings, so I didn't have to worry about the abnormally fast growth in tubes, which causes weak trunks. It is important to try to keep the leaders centered in the shelter. Deer will browse on what's available. And if it's a sugar maple, I suggest double stacking. Deer love sugar maples. I buy 100-foot rolls of 14 gauge 2x4 mesh wire and cut them into length and wrap them around a tree. This too has worked very well for me. Rabbits do get in and girdle a tree on me occasionally. If you are wrapping a fruit tree, also include trunk protection for rabbit damage. The other problem I have is deer running them over. Primarily, this is only a problem during the rut when deer lose their minds. I simply stake them in the ground with 2 wire stakes so deer will tip them over easily, but wind will not. Most of them I can simply tip back up and restake, but occasionally deer will get tangled up in them and more work is needed. These shelters can also cause some strange growth in the bottom branches of conifers, but so do deer antlers and deer mouths. If the tree isn't highly browsed by deer, like a spruce or a red cedar, I won't shelter them until they are considered big enough to rub on. Sometimes I am too late. This white cedar did not survive this encounter. Vines also love wire shelters, but an annual visit allows them to be pretty easily removed. This is not the least expensive method, with a 100-foot roll of wire currently running about $55 to $70, and it will produce 18 to 25 shelters for me. But if you are stubborn about planting white pine and other trees deer love to browse on in an area with a deer population, it's a great alternative to losing all your work you put into planting that tree. I have trees that have significantly grown through these shelters now and have started pulling the shelters. Timing is crucial. If not done at the right time, you may end up causing damage to the tree, or you may need to cut the wire shelter up to get it off. If you have questions about this video or other tree-related questions, lots of information can be found on the Outreach Outdoor forums. And if you don't find the answer you are looking for, ask the forum members. Many are eager to share their experiences. Now, get out there and plant a tree and then protect it, so it can be part of your legacy.